what if the worst betrayal of your life was actually the beginning of your greatest destiny? Imagine being hated by the very people who should have loved you the most, betrayed by your own family, stripped of everything you owned, and sold like property to strangers. Most people would never recover from that kind of pain. But the story you are about to hear proves something powerful. Sometimes the darkest moments of your life are only the beginning of God's greatest plan. This is the incredible story of Joseph, a young dreamer whose life went from a pit to a prison and finally to a palace. Joseph was just 17 years old when everything began to change. He was the son of Jacob, a man who loved him deeply. In fact, Jacob loved Joseph more than all his other sons. To show that love, Jacob gave Joseph a special gift, a beautiful robe made with many colors. It was not just clothing, it was a symbol of favor and affection. But what Jacob intended as love slowly became the seed of jealousy inside the hearts of Joseph's brothers. Every time they saw that robe, they were reminded that their father treated Joseph differently. While Joseph may not have fully understood the tension, his brothers felt it deeply. What began as irritation slowly grew into resentment, and resentment slowly turned into hatred. Joseph also had something else that made things worse. Joseph was a dreamer. One night, Joseph had a strange and powerful dream. In the dream, he and his brothers were in the field binding bundles of grain together. Suddenly, Joseph's bundle stood upright, while the bundles belonging to his brothers gathered around it and bowed down. Joseph shared the dream with his brothers, not realizing how it would sound to them. Instead of celebrating, they became furious. "Do you really think you will rule over us?" they asked angrily. "Do you think we will bow down to you?" From that moment, their hatred for Joseph grew even stronger. Then Joseph had another dream. This time, the sun, the moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to him. When he told this dream to his family, even his father was surprised. Jacob wondered quietly what it could mean, but Joseph's brothers burned with jealousy. To them, Joseph was no longer just their younger brother. He had become the dreamer they despised. One day, Jacob sent Joseph to check on his brothers, who were tending sheep far away from home. Joseph traveled across the field searching for them. Eventually, he found them in the distance. But the brothers saw Joseph approaching. Something dark entered their hearts. Instead of welcoming him, they began whispering among themselves. "Look," they said, "here comes the dreamer." Then one of them said something chilling. "Let's kill him." They began plotting against their own brother. Their plan was simple. They would kill Joseph, throw his body into a pit, and tell their father that a wild animal had devoured him. "Then we will see what becomes of his dreams," they said. Joseph had no idea what was waiting for him. He approached them expecting family, but instead he walked straight into betrayal. The moment Joseph reached them, the brothers grabbed him. They ripped the beautiful robe from his body, the robe that symbolized their father's love. They dragged him to a deep, empty pit and threw him inside. Imagine the fear Joseph must have felt in that moment. The darkness surrounding him, the steep walls of the pit rising high above him, the voices of his brothers standing above the opening. Joseph cried out for help. He begged them to let him out, but no one listened. Instead, the brothers sat nearby and began eating a meal as if nothing had happened. While they were sitting there, they noticed a caravan of traders traveling toward Egypt. These merchants were transporting spices and goods across the desert. Suddenly, one of the brothers had a different idea. "Why should we kill him?" he said. "Let's sell him instead." The others agreed. They pulled Joseph out of the pit and sold him for 20 pieces of silver. Just like that, Joseph's life changed forever. The traders carried him far away from his home, far away from his father, and far away from everything he had ever known. He arrived in Egypt as a slave in a foreign land. At this point, many people would have lost hope. Betrayed by family, sold into slavery, taken to a strange country. But Joseph made a decision that would shape the rest of his life. Even in hardship, he chose faithfulness. Joseph was purchased by an Egyptian official named Potiphar, a powerful captain who served Pharaoh. Joseph began working in Potiphar's household as just another servant. Every morning he woke before sunrise. Every day he worked while others rested. No one in Egypt knew his story. No one knew he had once been the favored son of Jacob. To them, he was just another slave. But Joseph refused to allow bitterness to control him. Even though he had been betrayed, even though he had been sold, even though he had every reason to give up, Joseph chose integrity. He worked with honesty when no one was watching. He swept the floors meticulously. He counted the coins with care. He washed every dish as if each act mattered to God. Day after day, month after month, year after year. Slowly, something began to happen. Potiphar started to notice him. "This young Hebrew," Potiphar said to himself, "is unlike any servant I have ever had. He's trustworthy, responsible, and wise beyond his years." Soon, Joseph was promoted, then promoted again. Eventually, Potiphar placed Joseph in charge of his entire household. Every servant answered to him. Every resource passed through his hands. The slave had become the manager of everything. For the first time in years, Joseph's life seemed to be moving upward again. But sometimes, the moment life begins to look stable, the next test appears. Potiphar's wife began to notice Joseph. He was young, capable, and handsome. She repeatedly tried to seduce him, asking him to betray his master. But Joseph refused. He knew it would be wrong, not only against Potiphar, but against God. Day after day, she pressured him, but Joseph continued to resist. Then, one day, when Joseph was alone in the house doing his work, Potiphar's wife grabbed him and demanded that he lie with her. Joseph pulled away immediately and ran from the house, leaving his cloak behind in her hands. Humiliated and angry, Potiphar's wife decided to lie. She told everyone that Joseph had tried to attack her. When Potiphar heard the accusation, he became furious. Without investigating the truth, he had Joseph thrown into prison. Once again, Joseph's life collapsed, from favored son to slave, and now to prisoner. The prison doors slammed shut behind him. Imagine how Joseph must have felt in that moment. He had done the right thing, yet he was punished for it. But even inside that prison, God had not abandoned him. The prison warden soon noticed Joseph's character. Once again, Joseph proved himself responsible and trustworthy. Before long, he was placed in charge of the other prisoners and the daily activities inside the prison. Then, one night, something unusual happened. Two of Pharaoh's servants were thrown into the same prison, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker. Both men had troubling dreams they could not understand. Joseph noticed they were disturbed and asked them what was wrong. They explained their dreams. Joseph listened carefully and then said something remarkable. Interpretations belong to God. With God's help, Joseph explained their dreams. The cupbearer would be restored to his position within 3 days, but the baker would be executed. 3 days later, exactly as Joseph predicted, both interpretations came true. Before the cupbearer left prison, Joseph made one simple request. "Please remember me when you return to Pharaoh. Tell me about me so I can be released." But the cupbearer forgot. Days turned into months, months into years. Joseph remained in prison, waiting. Yet somehow, Joseph continued to remain faithful. Then one night, Pharaoh himself had troubling dreams that none of the wise men of Egypt could explain. Suddenly, the cupbearer remembered Joseph. He told Pharaoh about the Hebrew prisoner who could interpret dreams. Joseph was immediately brought out of the prison and taken before Pharaoh. Pharaoh explained his dreams. 7 healthy cows were devoured by 7 thin ones. 7 full heads of grain were swallowed by 7 withered ones. Joseph listened carefully and explained the meaning. The dreams were a warning from God. Egypt would experience 7 years of great abundance, followed by 7 years of devastating famine. Joseph then suggested a plan. During the 7 good years, Egypt should store grain so the nation could survive the famine. Pharaoh was amazed by Joseph's wisdom. He looked at his advisors and said, "Can we find anyone like this man, one in whom the Spirit of God lives?" Then something incredible happened. Pharaoh appointed Joseph ruler over all Egypt, second only to the king himself. The young man who had once been thrown into a pit was now standing in the palace. Years later, the famine spread across many countries, including the land where Joseph's brothers lived. Desperate for food, they traveled to Egypt to buy grain. When they stood before Joseph, they did not recognize him, but Joseph recognized them immediately. The brothers who had betrayed him, the ones who sold him, were now bowing before him. The dreams Joseph had as a teenager were finally coming true. Now Joseph had the power to punish them. He had the authority to take revenge. But instead, something unexpected happened. Joseph chose mercy. When he finally revealed his identity, his brothers were terrified. They expected anger. They expected judgment. But Joseph said something they would never forget. "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." Joseph forgave them, and in that moment, the story of betrayal became a story of redemption. Joseph's story teaches something powerful. The pit was not the end. The slavery was not the end. The prison was not the end. Sometimes the darkest chapters of our lives are not punishments, they are preparation. Joseph thought he was being buried, but in reality, he was being planted. If this story reminded you that God can turn pain into purpose, and that even the darkest times can lead to your greatest destiny, then don't wait. Subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications, because there are many more Bible stories waiting to inspire you, to teach patience, courage, and faith. And the next story might speak directly to your journey. Sometimes the dream takes time, but the story is never over.